courage, is that teachable? Where did you go and tap your courage from?
I'll tell you a story because I think it's easier understood with a story. How do you change a mindset? It sounds so complex and difficult and intangible. The question is always, change always starts with you. You can't change the other one, so start with you. Perceive what you're feeling, thinking, doing. And if you make that conscious and take accountability, you've already set the stepping stone for changing and shaping the future to something better. Prime Minister of Canada had a beautiful speech, and he said, if you don't sit at the table, you will be on the menu. A capability, a competence is looking at the situation as it is. Violence starts in words, in thoughts. It's the same with a snowflake. One snowflake, and eventually it can have the power of an avalanche. Change starts with one person. A manager came along and said, emotions have nothing to do within an office. And I started laughing out loud because I said, so where did you leave your emotions? Did you, hang them on in the cloakroom, or where did you leave them? Because I explained to him afterwards
I am so happy that you're here on my podcast. Really, I am so delighted. We've met a couple of times online. So we're both a member at Global Woman Club. And, ever since we've talked a couple of times, I was so much in awe with you and Barbara, because Barbara was already on the podcast, Barbara Joshua. And exactly. I was so much in awe because, this podcast is called 30 Years of Wisdom. And it's like, altogether, we have like over 90 years of wisdom.
Exactly. 3 of us, we have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. So explain a little bit who you are, what your background is, what you do, please.
Thanks for the lovely introduction and welcome. Yes, my name is Dr. Gabriele Lang. I live and work in Vienna. I'm a mum of a teenage boy of 14 years. And for my education, I'm a psychologist. And I'm the founder and managing director of the e-platform Up and Change. So what do? I work with managers and organizations anytime there's friction. And then I come in and enable them to solve conflicts and to make them make effective collaboration possible in organizations, even in challenging times, which I think is the most important topic nowadays, because there's so much going on from external circumstances which are already challenging. So the skill set is so important to be able to collaborate despite challenges. And what I like to say is, you cannot prevent challenges, but you can learn to master them.
I really like that you said, you cannot do anything about friction, but you can definitely learn how to handle friction and how to master it, actually. I master your emotions, because this is what it's all about. Definitely. And whether that's in business, yeah, absolutely. And whether it's in business or it's in life, I have this motto, and I always say, how you do anything is how you do everything.
So true, Jacky. I always say there's hardly any differences between private life and business life. Everything I teach and I accompany people with, you can apply to your personal life, your business life, because it's all about fulfilling interactions, fulfilling relationships. And it doesn't really matter if it's private or business-wise. I always say, if life is easygoing, everyone can do everything. If challenges come in, if it gets complex, if there's people who can't get on with each other, then it depends on what skill set on the emotional side you have to cope with these challenges, to master these challenges. So 10% is more or less what happens to you, and 90% how you react.
Yes, absolutely. And especially in, like you just said, in these challenging times, we're not in control of anything anymore. And we just need to sit back and wait and see where it leads. Because in some situations, you cannot change anything. And that's where we're at.
I would add or complement to that. You can't change certain external circumstances, but you can definitely decide what you think, what you do, and how you react. So that's something where I always say we've got the power to change the formula. So I can't change the other person, I can't change the external circumstances, but I do have the power to change what I say, what I do, what I think, what I feel. And what I feel is, of course, more difficult because first, I probably feel it through body feelings, and then I can only, work on my, my emotional status. That's the challenge. You have to do some work. It's not sort of that we come to on earth or we are born with all these skills already, but you can learn them. And that's the beauty of the whole thing. So I wouldn't say we can't decide upon anything, but we can decide upon a lot of things and we can steer that. We are at the steering wheel of our car. And that's the important twist to the whole thing.
In life, there are very, pressure moments. But at these pressure moments, we act in a sort of default survival mode. So we have fight, flight, or freeze. Do you see that on the business level as well?
Yeah, because anytime I can stay calm, I don't feel in danger. Then I can be quite factual and, I can cope with quite a lot of things. If my body reacts with fight or flight mechanism, I feel some danger. And then already I don't feel secure. It's sort of not my brain will be leading the way, but it'll be my emotions which lead the way. And that's the important thing. And you've got that in business life and you've got it in private life. It's so funny because in executive coaching once, a manager came along and said, emotions have nothing to do within an office. And I started laughing out loud because I said, so where did you leave your emotions? Did you, hang them on in the cloakroom, or where did you leave them? Because I explained to him afterwards is we're always one person. So it's not as if we were always rational human beings. Otherwise the world would look different. So every time, also in a business, I feel in danger, I don't feel psychologically safe, I will react differently than if everything is calm and easygoing. And that's important to know, because that's why I need to check that in stress situations, I've got the skill set to cope.
So what you actually do is you go into organizations and you teach the leader or the team how to react to stress, or
I usually work with the person or the team who have certain kind of pressure. Otherwise, people don't do anything. People like being in their comfort zone because then they are in control. But when they feel pressure, when they perceive certain situations as enervating and as exhausting, usually that's the impulse to get some help. So if people come to me, it depends. Either I work with a single person, which perhaps is the manager, or who's perhaps the team leader, or I work with teams. It always, the work I do always has two preconditions. You need some kind of pressure and you need the courage to change. And that means you need some kind of capability of self-reflection. Because if you don't start changing your own behavior, nothing will change. So if you're a person who likes finger pointing, who likes accusing people of something, who likes moaning, who gets overexcited, nothing will change. It relieves the person. So if you get overexcited or you moan about something, it relieves in the moment, but there's no sustainable success following.
All right. So how do you... Courage, is that teachable? Because you say, you know, when you have the courage, okay. But what if when you lack the courage? I see so many employees in businesses, you know, lacking the courage to step up or to stand up for themselves. They just like go and sit in a corner, or just, you know, go numb, and then, you know, after a while, when it happens over and over again, often those people get sick long-term mentally. So
Yeah,
what about courage? Explain something about that, so the listener can understand this more. Where did you go and tap your courage from?
I'll tell you a story because I think it's easier understood with a story. There was this moment which was my tipping point, my turning point, which was 2006. I was working for one of the top 5 executive search companies, and I loved my work. I was very successful in my work. I had all my educations, and still there was the moment where I realized I wasn't enjoying it. It wasn't psychologically secure for me. I was not sleeping well. I was moaning a lot about certain people. And certain people and meetings made me powerless. So you need this kind of perception that something's not right. And how do you get courage? I remember that point in 2006 where I had this slight feeling I should be doing something, I should be changing something. And this fear came up that I thought, yeah, but if I look into this issue, something might appear which I don't want to see. And I even had studied psychology, so you would presume I was a person, you know, who had studied, you know, everything which is concerning the psychological side of human beings. But still there was this fear. And I always say it is, if you've got pressure and the pressure is high enough, you will hop over this fear. But it is step by step, and that's what I explain. It doesn't really matter if I explain it to my 14-year-old, if I explain it to a manager, if I explain it in front of teams or in front of an audience listening to me. It's always, if you've got an elephant in front of you, a complex problem, a certain emotion which makes you powerless, which makes you freeze, which might you know, encourage you to flight or to fight or whatever. It is a high value to have a look. And I've developed this impact formula with 6 steps. I always say you first have to perceive something. If you don't perceive negative or critical or annoying feelings, you know, emotional feelings, but also body feelings, and you don't make those, and that's the second step, make them conscious, then you haven't got a starting point to change. But if you perceive, you make them conscious and you take accountability, then the 4th step is becoming active, and then you learn and take step by step, as quickly as possible, as slowly as necessary. And then you can change the future, which is the 6th step. Okay. But it is also always, there's a starting point. And that's usually a kind of pressure you are feeling where you say, I don't want to continue that way.
And can you share what kind of steps those are that you teach her?
So if I, for example, take individual work, which I do with a lot of executives, and for example, managing director comes along and he's got difficulty with a peer, yeah, or with a board member or with an employee, it doesn't really matter, yeah, then it's always about understanding what the situation is like. And what you do is you then analyze a certain situation and find out how did the person react. You know, what did he think? What did he do? What did he feel? And sometimes it's enough to just teach or explain or show certain techniques, like communication techniques, like techniques of understanding how to read people. You know, we've developed stress typologies, so understanding that not every person reacts the same under stress. And sometimes this already helps a lot to make somebody clear, oh, wait a minute, if you put pressure on somebody who's more the introvert in stress situations, then the person will flight, you know, he will run away. So you have to react differently than if somebody, you know, is sort of the fight person. So sometimes that already helps. But sometimes the way to solutions and to development and upskilling is through working with techniques which cover the emotions, so emotional techniques. So for example, if somebody gets furious in certain situations, you work with the anger. That's the way. So sometimes it's the rational approach, sometimes it's the emotional approach. It always depends. And there's this lovely saying, you know, the soul says to the body, you go forward because she doesn't hear me.
Okay, and do you have like a story where you witnessed an incredible transformation?
Yes, all the time. I've got, you know, managers sitting in front of me who have never tapped into their feelings. And if you then watch people suddenly detecting that under a certain emotion, there's a situation back perhaps a couple of years or a couple of months or decades, which suddenly come into their consciousness, and they learn how to integrate that feeling which they just suppressed. That's wonderful transformations you can watch. And I mean, I can only tell for myself, you know, 20 years ago, I remember doing the first 10 hours of you know, getting support on my way, you know, coping with people who reacted differently than I did, or with you know, certain communication styles which I perceived as frightening, as critical. And after 10 hours, I thought, perfect, I'm done. Today, it makes me smile because I think if you look at yourself like an onion with a lot of layers, then every challenge, every person you perceive as difficult, every friction is a gift. Because if you've got the courage, and that comes over time, so again, courage grows over time doing such work because you just know you are safe. But if you do this work, you can, you know, take one layer off of dirt or filth or burden, and then you live along, and suddenly in an organization, you detect the next layer, which is causing some issues. And then you work with the next layer. So step by step. And the beauty is, if you perceive it as a lifelong lesson, the more you do such work on an emotional side and on a rational side, the more easygoing it is, the more joy in life you have, the more successful you are in creating fulfilling partnerships, which especially is important nowadays. Listen to the World Economic Forum we just had in Davos, beginning of 2026. Dialogue was the topic. And the Prime Minister of Canada had a beautiful speech. And he said, if you don't sit at the table, you will be on the menu. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah,
but
that
it's
was
such
wonderful.
a
He got
deep
standing
meaning.
ovation.
Pardon?
Did you see he got a standing ovation? There was
Yes, yes,
only one that got a standing ovation, the Prime
yes.
Minister of
And I
Canada.
think that the beauty is, I do write blogs and I do write newsletters and I do write posts regularly. And just one of the recent posts I said, a capability, a competence is looking at the situation as it is and not thinking, there's a lot of potential, or perhaps it could be, and you're sort of dreaming of a situation which is not congruent with what the person opposite says or does. That's power. That's the power of not thinking negatively or pessimistically, but it's the power of seeing the things as they are, coping with those feelings, because of course it's frustrating, because I used to live in a bubble thinking everyone wants compromise and consensus. Yeah, but that's a bubble, because there's a lot of people who are not even intending to collaborate with you. If you don't have the power and the skills to detect that, you will waste your resources and you will get worn out and burnt out. And that's why it's so important what was discussed, with dialogue. And dialogue means coping, having the capability of de-escalating, understanding how to read people, understanding if people are not willing to collaborate, and then looking for the coalitions and the people who are willing to collaborate. And that's the beauty and the power, the leadership power.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And also, that's the moment that you embody your own wisdom and your own knowledge.
Yeah. And
Because
it is detecting your own power, because I was a very shy girl. I can remember, I didn't even dare to go into the class of my brother. I waited till a girl came out, and then I sort of said, "Can you please send my brother?" I mean, I was a very shy girl, yeah. But I can remember at the age of 14, I decided this is no way to progress, because if you never open your mouth, nobody hears you. But it was still quite a long time from the age of 14 till I was, sort of beginning mid-30, till I really entered this journey of getting out of my comfort zone and developing and unleashing my potential. Because what's the use of potential if you don't speak up? And that means, and that's the psychological side, that also means you have to get rid of this intention and expectation that everyone will love you. That if you say something which is necessary, that everyone will agree. No. And even if people, react in a very offensive way, it depends on you how you react. Do you enter a power game, for example, or do you know how to de-escalate? Or will you escalate? It's all about these communication and behavioral skills and techniques and toolkit you can learn with the help of psychology to develop your capability to unleash your potential. And then I fully agree to what the Prime Minister of Canada said, is you will have the capability of finding the right interactions, the right relationships, the right partnerships, the right coalitions to bring together the forces and to solve complex problems. Because some people are only looking for the person, to accuse him and say, this person is guilty of whatever. I'm not interested in that. It's a waste of time. But it is about finding the solutions. And there's so many problems out there. We are not running out of problems, yeah? So if we find the right people, and if you don't find the right people, trusting yourself that you go the way by yourself for a certain amount of time till you find the right people. And that's difficult sometimes, especially if you're an entrepreneur. If you start doing and developing something which is new, which goes in the emotional direction, which enables emotional intelligence, then sometimes the way can be very lonely. You know, that's what Barbara, my business partner, and myself have discovered. But it is, if you've got a strong vision, if you've got a strong purpose, then you will have the power to go the right direction and to find the people you can interact with and where it is a fulfilling relationship. Because what's the sense of relationships which drain your energy? Absolutely. You won't have the energy to solve problems anymore.
No, you're so right. And also, I think this is very beautiful, the way you put it and the context that you're putting it in. You know, in one of my podcasts, and I made a short of it, and I posted it on Instagram and on LinkedIn. And you know, I say, oh, it was with a year change. You know, the end of 25, beginning of 26. I said, yeah. I said, you know, just imagine we're living with 8 billion people here on the planet. Yeah. And each and every one of us has a unique fingerprint and a unique footprint. What does that tell you about yourself? That you are unique and that you come with your uniqueness. And we all have our good sides and our not so nice sides. And we all make mistakes because those mistakes we need to do, because otherwise we cannot learn. But what I also say is, you know, once you realize that you are unique, you have a responsibility to share your uniqueness, to share your gift, and to share your talent with others, because others can learn from you. So there is, I think, from my point of view, a really responsibility that you need to look within and look at your uniqueness, or find a guide to help you with that, to, you know, get it out of you.
I would like to add something. It's not done with finding your own uniqueness, but understanding what I'm good at is the one side. The other thing is interacting with other people. And when you were just explaining, you know, that everyone has dormant potential, I think the important thing is, and that comes back again to the situation we are currently in organizations, in politics, you know, worldwide. Yes, we have differences in opinion. Yes, there are different expectations. Yeah. And the question is, there's a lot of violence already in our language. I mean, sometimes I'm shocked if I listen to politicians. It doesn't really matter in which country, and the way they communicate to each other. They should be role models to us, to young people. And you know, I know how easy it is said. You shouldn't be you know, using violence in language. But even if other people do it, the starting point for change and for progress and productivity nowadays is understanding certain fighting techniques, understanding what a psycho game is, understanding power games, understanding certain stress topologies, so how people react under pressure. Because only if you understand them, you are prepared for that. And then you need a certain skill set to communicate with people like that. Because if I always, you know, run away from every tough situation, I'll be running quite a lot. If I freeze all the time, it'll be very quiet. And if I fight all the time, it'll be very energy draining. So the question is, how do we get out of this danger zone again to a fundament of psychological secure cultures where people can discuss ideas, can brainstorm again? Because for creativity, we need diversity. And diversity can be diversity in opinion, diversity in gender, diversity in age, diversity in countries, in functions, whatever. But creativity is higher the more diversity. That's difficult in everyday life. So you have to learn to cope with that diversity, to have a mindset which is open enough, which doesn't make you feel in danger all the time, because then you won't be calm and factual and violentless in your communication. And that's the beauty, and that's why we've developed a leadership program, Conflict Mastery, to teach these skills. Because what's the sense in sort of teaching, how it should be if people don't know, but what do I do now? I know where it should be, I know where I am, but there's a gap. What do I do? So we concentrate on developing, on navigating the people from the problem to the solutions, teaching the skills, on an emotional, psychological, but also rational way. And that's I think the necessity nowadays, not to think about politicians and finger pointing, but thinking, okay, what can I do in my circle of influence? Because I can't change a certain situation in politics worldwide, but I can help others, get the skill set, the toolkits to be capable of violentless communication, to be capable of staying calm in friction, of being capable of de-escalating in case it escalates. And if I start doing that in my family, with my friends, in my organization, then I will help and enable organizations. And our vision is, how can we enable and make people capable of effective collaboration in challenging situations? And that can be used privately, business-wise, in politics, in organizations. It doesn't really matter. It's about making people personally more competent and socially more competent. And it's such a fascinating topic. You can do so much if you just take the first step and stop moaning, accusing, and finger pointing.
Beautifully said. Yeah. Actually, it covers the whole layer. What you say, it really covers it. You give online trainings, don't you, and webinars as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly. What I had the idea in 2017 when I was walking over a bridge in Vienna. I was thinking about, what can I do? I had been thinking of that quite a long time. What can I do to spread that news, that experience, those skills, those techniques in a much broader way? Because I know I transformed from freeze to impact over the years. So I had a huge skill set. And I did realize that not everyone had the money, not everyone had the time, not everyone knew what the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist and a psychotherapist and a coach was. And it was also that even, managing directors were saying, please send me the bill privately because I don't want anyone to know I'm doing coaching. So it had a certain kind of negative connotation. And that was the time when I decided I was going to digitize my executive coaching experience. And that was the starting point for our e-platform Up and Change, with a portfolio of tools, personally and digitally, where we navigate the people from problems to solutions and emotional development, upskilling, or name it, emotional intelligence. And we have instant help 24/7, but we also have a group coaching program where we, for example, have the webinar, which is free, to also show, not only give away solutions, what they can do for free, but also tell them how they can progress and work further in this area. And then, of course, we have one-to-one executive coaching. So we've got everything. We've also got quite a lot of tools concerning work on organizational cultures, how to enable a psychologically secure culture. But you always start with the individual work, because the influence of leadership is high, up to 70%. And it results in influences concerning engagement of people, and it influences the level of creativity, it influences the problem solving. So it influences so much. So if every manager concentrated on their own personal competence, their own social competence, a lot would become better.
I absolutely.
Because otherwise people talk about changing the mindset. I went to a discussion on Monday, and people were again saying it's about the mindset and the mindset and the mindset. Yeah, but how do you change a mindset? It sounds so complex and difficult and intangible. So the question is always, change always starts with you. You can't change the other one, so start with you. And how does it start? Impact formula we've developed is always perceive what you're feeling, thinking, doing.
Yeah.
And if you make that conscious and take accountability, you've already set the stepping stone for changing and shaping the future to something better.
Yes, and accountability is also being aware of becoming aware that it's all a skill set. And, taking accountability means that you need to take the first step to go out there and to find someone that can guide you. You need to surround yourself with people that been there, done that, studied it, have years of experience in that topic. But it all starts with you and taking the responsibility of going out there and taking action.
Exactly. And the interesting thing, Jacky, is Daniel Goleman says that emotional intelligence starts at the end of the 20s, so beginning of the 30s. And I always thought, why does it start so late? Yeah. But if I look back, it all started with me when I was mid-30. Because why? When I had a first tough situation in a job, you sort of coped. Sometimes you just went quiet. Sometimes you froze. Sometimes you run away. Why? How do you run away in a job? You just quit your job and get the next job. That's the same in private life. If relationship doesn't work out, you just run away, more or less. Yeah, I'm just exaggerating a bit. Yeah, and then you have the next partnership or the next job. But funnily enough, everything you should be learning suddenly appears in a slightly different color. So you can't run away from your learning lessons. Yeah. So, for example, when people were shouting, I hated people shouting at me. Yeah. Don't ask me why. I found out over the years, why that made me freeze. But anyway, so after the first situations where I had choleric opposites, and sort of, froze or tried to stay quiet and please them, yeah, I decided, okay, that's not very successful because the other one doesn't change, and I don't get topics, the topics don't progress. So eventually I decided I needed to learn how to cope with these people and to make them calmer. So what do? What aren't you allowed to do with somebody who tends to choleric fits or temper tantrums? Yeah. And so you start working with your fears. Why does it freak you out when somebody is loud or aggressive? Yeah. Or, you feel it as aggression. Yeah. And then you find out about yourself and about the triggers, and you find out about your own behavior. And then sort of when it happens the next time, you react differently, you react better, and it's experimenting and it's learning, and you get better over time, and it's more joyful suddenly. And suddenly you can de-escalate, and suddenly it's possible, to get the person down again and find solutions together. So I always say it's like leadership power. It's a lot of work I did, but I found out I could move topics. I could help people collaborate. I could collaborate better. And I did that private wise. I did it with my kid. You have to start finding out what are your own fears, what are your beliefs, what are your expectations, what are your self-doubts. And I love the picture of I'm sitting in a car driving, and in the back row, I've got my fears, I've got my self-doubts, I've got my expectations, I've got my beliefs. The question is, if my self-doubt and don't believe my work has finished and I'm perfect, I only, in the last week, some self-doubt came up because I've got a big vision and I've got a big purpose, I'm following. If a self-doubt suddenly becomes louder, it's the question how I react. Either I let the self-doubt take over the steering wheel and I get out of the car, or I stay behind the steering wheel and I can cope and say, okay, here you are again. I know you, and I learn to, let's exaggerate a bit, to dance with that self-doubt. Because I've already built confidence. I've built my knowledge about self-worth. I've built my toolkit and I've got techniques to cope with it. And that's what I did. I spent nights where fears came up, private-wise, business-wise, especially if you're an entrepreneur. It's not always that everything goes wonderfully like on butter. But, you have fears, especially last year was a tough year because a lot of budgets were cut suddenly. Quite a lot of organizations were sort of in stillstand and weren't, booking as they used to be booking. So either you freeze too, or you handle and you cope with the situation. You learn to master the challenge. And that's the beauty. It's leadership power. And I think I would just wish more people, it's like a jar of jewels. And I would wish that more people just dared to touch and get one piece of jewel. And that's why we've got freebies like the webinar, like the stress tube check, where people don't even have to spend money. But it is about, if you have enough pressure and if you have the courage to do the first step, you go on a journey, and I can promise you, if you go it step by step, as quickly as possible, as slowly as necessary, you will come to the stage where you feel more joy, more ease, more success, more fulfilling relationships, private-wise and business-wise. That's the beauty. And you can start shaping a culture which is psychology secure. And that's my vision. That's my purpose. That's why I'm not giving up. Even, we were going to a ball and people were saying, this is nonsense, and quite, sort of de-evaluating certain people, but in a humorous way. You know how people say, that was only fun. But I always tell my boy, my son, I always tell fun is only if both laugh. If the one only politely smiles and in reality thinks it's very offensive or it's very, insulting, it's not fun. And if just more people got more sensitive about that violence starts in words, in thoughts, and you can really handle on that level already. And have the courage that change starts with one person. It's the same with a snowflake. One snowflake, and eventually it can have the power of an avalanche, which usually is negative. But what I mean is the picture is, I think, nice, yeah. And I'm not knowledgeable in physics and whatever, but my picture is an avalanche starts with one little snowflake, and the power it can have afterwards, by getting together with other snowflakes. And that's the same with human beings. Like Michael Carney said, the Prime Minister of Canada, it's about dialogue, it's about, seeing the world as it is, not regretting it as change. That's just reality. And nothing in this world only has disadvantages. Everything has advantages and disadvantages. Sometimes I can only see the advantages looking back. It's never too late. There's a nice saying which says, if you haven't changed, change now is too late, but better now than never.
On this note, this is wonderful. Oh my God. So many listeners are going to take so much away from what you just said. I was like, I'm sitting here just listening to you and just like see everything unfolds. And Dr. Gabriele Lang, thank you so much for this podcast. Please share with the people where they can find you. What are your main social media places where they can find you, and all the other links to Upchain and the links, to the webinar and such. I will, of course, put in the description below, but it would be nice if they can hear where they can follow you and find you.
Yeah. So first of all, Jacky, thanks a lot. It's an honor to be here and, spreading the news that you're not powerless, but you've got a lot of power. Follow me on LinkedIn, Dr. Gabriele Lang. We've also got upandchange.com, our website. We're on Instagram under Dr. Gabriele Lang. And if you subscribe to the newsletter, you'll regularly know. And for example, in the last newsletter, I told the people what gaslighting is. And, just getting knowledgeable about all this terminology and what is happening outside widens your perception and, opens your senses. And that's the beautiful thing. So, yeah, just reach out to me. And I'm happy to help. And we've got free webinar, and it's all about if it gets tough in the organizations, there's help.
It's very interesting what you said about the newsletter and gaslighting, because this could be a whole podcast on its own.
Yeah,
because it is a topic that is overspoken now at this moment, because
it couldn't be more relevant.
And it couldn't be more relevant. Absolutely.
Relevant.
Yeah.
And that's why it needs more people becoming active and becoming more courageous, that they've got power to change everything within their circle of influence.
Yeah, absolutely.
And mindset changes over time then. It's sort of, you get more emotionally intelligent. And yes, cultures in organizations are then more profitable. But you can have tons of studies. If you don't believe it and you just ignore them and suppress them, nothing happens.
Yeah.
Or the opposite.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I hope definitely we were going to do another podcast again, because I think we can talk for hours and hours.
There's a lot of topics I can speak about, about stress topologies, for example, about tigers and dolphins and bees and tortoises. So
yeah, definitely.
Let us talk again.
It's the reason that I started this podcast in the summer of 25, because you hear so many times, I wish I've known this, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And at one point I was thinking, how many times did I think, well, I wish I've known this 30 years ago, 25 years ago. And so at one point I thought, well, let me just, start a podcast, 30 years of wisdom. And you see, here is over 60 years of wisdom combined. But it's this what people need to know. And they always, people gossip about social media, and they're right up to a certain point, but this is also social media. Podcast is also a part of social media, and you can use it for the better and learn something, or you can use it for the worse and just doom scroll all day. It's
Yeah,
a
it's the balance. It's the
it's a
balance.
balance.
And you
Yeah.
have to decide if it's, worth listening or if it's just rubbish and made up, because you can, of course, there's a lot of nonsense out on social media. And there was a moment where I hated social media because I thought, why should I enter in this noise bubble? Yeah. But, to become visible, you have to have the courage, and it's got a lot to do also being courageous enough to state your point of view and to talk about the topic and the purpose, and also, accept that there's people who perhaps get fearful of what you're saying, or annoyed. But the interesting thing is if you go into resonance, so if you react to something another person says or does, it's always about why are you reacting. And I always tell people,
Why?
if you can stay calm, continue your way. If you can't stay calm, then you should have a look, because that's your development journey.
Is there, for our close, is there a book that you could recommend that people go to listen or to buy?
There's a lot of books which I thought were very valuable on the way. One I really loved, although I read it years ago, is from Eva Maria Zurhorst, who's a German. And she said, if you love yourself, it doesn't really matter who you marry.
Wow.
And I loved that book because it was sort of at the starting point of finding out that if you choose a job, if you choose a partner, there's a reason for you choosing. And if you dare to look, you will learn something. You just have to have the courage to have a look.
Thank you so much. This is a beautiful
Thanks
interview.
a lot to you, Jacky. Bye.